Hi there. So today we're gonna see how currency exchange API can be used in a Blue Prism tool. In the previous lecture, we have talked about what are the configuration that we need to do. We have briefly talked about the basic setting, common header, and we need to define actions and configure parameters. And once that is done, we should be able to use into a Blue Prism process. Let's quickly get hands around this. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to go on a system tab, and in system tab you need to go on web API services. You need to click a right click, or if this is already open you can simply go here and click on add services. When you click on the add services, a new pop-up window will appear which will looks like this. For this example, I have already configured it. So let me open the currency exchange API, which is being configured. So when you open it first time, this page will be shown. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to give a unique name here, and you need to give the base URL of the API. You must be wondering what is the base URL? Why not the exact URL, right? So as I have discussed previously, if you are using a API endpoint, there could be a n number of methods to API. But for all n number of API, there should be a certain part of API which is common and which can be treated as a base URL, right? So for this example, this is the base URL. And how I get this base URL? So let me quickly jump into the API documentation that has been given by the third party. All right. So for this example, I am using a third party API, which is a Rapid API. They have given this documentations, which is the API that we are using, which is free for use. And it has got two methods, get exchange and list quotes. And for this example, we are building and configuring the get exchange method into our Blue Prism. If you click here, you should be able to see this is the get method. And for testing the endpoint, you need to pass certain parameters. The parameters that you need to pass is header parameters, which is this one, which is the host, and then this is the API key, which works like authentication mechanism, so that request coming from the other third-party tools will be responded. And then there are certain parameters which are required and some are the optional. So we have already discussed about this, that we're gonna build a simple API which contains one get method, which is the exchange. The method name is exchange, right? And then we'll be using header parameter to pass the authentications, and we'll be using these three parameters to build the request URL, so that request could be made from Blue Prism to Rapid API, and then the response that we are getting from this will be absorbed into Blue Prism tool. In this, you should be able to see various examples of the different languages. So if you click on the C#, because that's a .NET platform we use in most of these RPA tools. So if you see here, the API endpoint is this one, and we need to build URL like this to send the request. If you see this URL, you should be able to identify this is the base URL, and then exchange is the name of the method that we're going to use, and then all these are query strings. So in the query strings we have three parameters. One is Q, which is nothing but an amount or quantity that we need to send, then from, which is the source currency, and to, which is the target currency, right? So we have three parameters. So from this I should be able to grab this, and I should be able to configure it here, which will work as my base URL. So that's a pretty common. You should be able to get it by the document that has been provided by the API. So once you configure this one, you click on common headers. So as the documentation says, you need to pass two headers information, which is shown here. So all you need to do is you need to copy this, and copy paste into tool. So once you do it, it will become this one. By the way, this API key would be your authentication, so make sure you keep it safe, because otherwise if you are using a paid API and it is being misused, you're gonna pay the bills. All right. So the next thing is that common parameters. So there is nothing common parameter because we are only using one methods here. So, or you can say when this will be used. So say for example, if we have more than one methods, because this API has got two methods, one is exchange, another one is the list code, and there are certain parameters which are common between these two methods, then we should be able to define that there, or then we should make a choice to define it the method label or action label, you could say, or at the common parameters label. So for this example, we will keep it blank. Common authentication, we are not using any authentication type, we are simply passing the API keys into the header informations. However, when we're gonna build the advanced AI ML stuff, or we're gonna use the APIs which has been provided by the Microsoft, Google and all those, we'll be using a different type of authentication. So I'll talk about different types of authentication in the, when we reach at those stages, but for now we are taking authentication type as a none. Similarly, we have a common code. Sometime before making a request, you need to perform certain functionalities like conversion of a dates and all those kind of stuff. So you should be able to do it here. But for this example, we don't require this. So the only thing that we required is a basic setting and then common header which contains the API informations. Now, now you need to come out the action. So if you need to define action, you need to click on this and you will get land up on this page. This page will talk about what is the name of this action, right? The name of action, you could give it to anything, but I would suggest you should give the name like with the method, which is the get method, because we are getting information from the API. And if it is a post, we should use a post keyword here. So we could write it as get exchange, and description is exchange because we are using the exchange endpoint. So base URL and then the exchange. That's the reason I have written it like so. But this is entirely up to you how you gonna define the names to Unix so that it should be easily identified when you are using this web API definitions into the processes. So get exchange is the name of my action, right? And you need to click on enable so that it should be visible and published in a objects, right? Now you need to come at the parameters. So when we look here, we have three parameters on Exchange API. We have three parameters, right? We have from, we have to, and we have the amount, which is a source amount. But these are only two required parameters. The third one is an optional, and we are going to get exchange rate. So we should be able to calculate why need to pass. We should be able to, when we get the exchange rate, we should be able to multiply it with the amount, and then we'll be getting the result. So for simplicity, I am removing this one and I am building only two parameters which are the required one, right? So I'll declare two variables, give it any name. For the similarity between the API names here and the endpoint, you should give the name which is defined here. So if you look here, you don't need to change the name. Name should be same. It should be from, it should be to. You can't give others names because the API endpoint will be built according to that. All right. So I have defined two, data type will be text, and then you need to click on this expose. If you don't click on expose, it will not be visible at object level. So you need to make sure that you have ticked the check boxes which is after the initial value. You can also set the initial values here, but that's gonna not good use, because anyways we'll have data items defined into Blue Prism Studio, and from there these data items will be coming. So we'll keep these as a blank. Okay, now the other thing that we need to do is, now the main part is we need to build a request, right? And if you look here, carefully, the request URL is this one, right? And if I open a notepad, simply just to explain you. So this is the base URL that we have already talked about. And this is the part of the API that we need to build into the request part, right? Exchange is the endpoint, and then we have this queue, right? But for this example, as this is optional, we should be able to remove it. So let's remove it. And then we have this from and to. But for our use case, this from data will be coming from the object, and this to will be also coming from object. So we'll define two variables here, which are like this, and we'll say it from, and then we'll say it like to, and then it will be done. So our endpoint will become something like this. Final endpoint, and the endpoint that we need to configure is this one, because we already have said this will be the base URL which will be appended to all the subsequent calls, right? So we'll quickly go back to the Blue Prism tool and we'll keep the URL path here. The one thing that you need to notice is there is a body content, and sometimes you need to provide the body content in a form of a JSON. Some API endpoint will receive data not in terms of the URL, but they needs data to be coming as a JSON. So in those cases, you need to configure it. Sorry. All right. And then for the header parts, sorry. So we have already built the request part, and we don't need to define anything in a header because the header information is already in a common header part. If we need to define something which is specific to this particular action, we should be able to define it here using a simple giving the name and then giving the values. And then the last one which need to be configured is the response. For this example, we're not gonna configure it because we'll be using the requests. When we are sending a request, we'll be getting a response. We'll be using the response content as it is because we know the response content that we are receiving from the Rapid API is in a form of a text. So we are not gonna change anything. We'll simply click OK, and once you click OK, it will be saved and it will be shown here. So you should be able to see that the name of the web services API is Currency Exchange API. There are two actions. The other action is a list action that I was building other day, and then you should be able to see the date, which is today because it has been modified, and then you should be able to use this into your processes. So now we are done with how to configure the web API services in a Blue Prism. Now we need to consume this. We need to consume this configured web API service into the process or into objects. Consuming this web API services in process and object is pretty easy. All you need to do is similar way that you have used any object by passing some input and getting output. You should be able to use this Exchange API. So that's a really cool feature. I love this. That's all for today. So we'll see in the next lecture how we're gonna use this web API into process.